We're at the bus stop that I was picked up by my trafficker at. We're in the spot it happened. Just where my life was pretty much turned upside down. Just by getting in somebody's car. Human trafficking happens all around us. We don't even notice it. It's happening at this bus stop. I think about that girls are being dropped off and picked up here all the time, and if I don't make a difference now, who will? If we don't take the responsibility on ourselves, then who are we expecting to do it? For me, if somebody said they cared about me, it would have been enough. This was the bus I was supposed to get on, actually. This exact one. The 201A. This one goes all the way up to my aunt and uncle's house. Looking for girls who were trying to leave their family and were hungry and alone, and he didn't care, you know, what race they were. He didn't care about any of that kind of stuff. For him, it was just money. It was just money.
Sometimes in order to understand this crime, we have to dispel some of the myths around it. And human trafficking carries with it a lot of myths, because when we talk about slavery, people think, what? That ended with the Civil War. But that is simply not true. There are more slaves today in our world than there were at any other time. And that includes the 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade. Human trafficking is the second largest criminal activity in the world. It recently surpassed arms trafficking. It is second only to drug trafficking. Because guess what? The traffickers, the gangs, the organized crime, they have figured out where you can sell a drug or a weapon only one time. You can sell a man or a woman or a boy or a girl over and over and over again.
Human trafficking is the exploitation of human beings for either the purposes of commercial sex or forced labor, and the trafficker uses force, fraud, or coercion to actually make money off of that person's back. Human trafficking is modern-day slavery, and these victims find themselves in situations that they literally cannot get out of.
Force might be physical threats to that person or maybe their family. Coercion, they may be threatened with some sort of, let's say, deportation, or perhaps even legal threats where they'll tell a woman, you must continue to prostitute for me, you must continue to go out there and earn me money, otherwise I'm going to call ACS and have them take your baby away because you're a prostitute. The fraud, of course, we deal with a lot, especially with teenagers. They're promised a job. They're promised some sort of romantic interest. They're promised a completely new life or escape or shelter. They don't realize what they're walking into.
The day that I met my trafficker was, it was March 10th or 9th. March 9th, 2014. I was going back to my aunt and uncle's house to sleep for the night, and then the next day I was leaving. was getting on a Greyhound bus to go to Ohio.
She asked me if I wanted to come party, and I remember looking them up and down, and he looked like he was really young. He was smiling, and he was wearing semi-nice clothes, but definitely not what you think of as like typical pimp clothes. She looked like she was younger than me. I thought if she was younger than me and she was safe, then it's probably an okay person. I told them about my Greyhound bus, and they said, well, how are you getting to the Greyhound bus? And I said, I have to take 4 local buses starting at 7 o'clock in the morning to get to this Greyhound station at 1. He said, well, why don't we just go pick up your stuff from your house? You can come here, you can sleep for a couple of hours, and then we'll drive you there. And this sounded really, really nice. And when I woke up, he was gone. He was gone from the house, and she was there. And I started to freak out. He walked in 4 minutes before the Greyhound bus was supposed to leave. And I picked up my stuff and we drove down the road. At 1:30, I was just like, stop, stop, we missed the bus. I was really trying to figure out what I was gonna do. And he's telling me this spiel about, oh, we'll get you nice clothes, we'll feed you, you can stay here, but you need to work with us for just 2 weeks, so we'll give you $500 to leave with. I knew what he was talking about. I knew that he was talking about prostitution. So that night I was trafficked for the first time. It was March 10th, 2014.
My grandmother was about, she relayed one story to me, and that was that she had to go into a bar and speak to a pimp for about a half hour. And what was supposed to be a 30-minute conversation wound up being a 2-hour conversation. And she revealed to me that she had to keep reminding herself, I have a husband and children at home, because this man is telling me everything I have ever wanted to hear and never knew I wanted to hear it. He was a consummate salesman. And that sort of combination, salesmanship or the ability to reach people without having any empathy for them whatsoever, I think sums them up very, very well.
Every trafficker is going to have their own rules because they're their own person, and they're going to have their own specific victim that they're working with. And I think it's just like every other type of reality in life. It's not all black and white. It comes in a lot of grays.
Once the 2 weeks had ended, I did ask him if I could leave. He said, well, your family hasn't even called about you. They clearly don't really care about you. We care about you. How do you know this friend in Ohio cares about you? And so he manipulated me and to staying longer. When the manipulation stopped working, he got physical.
So force is anything that you can imagine when that word comes into your head, right? It's the beatings, the burnings, the rape, the gang rape. Victims have been shot, they've been knifed, they've been mutilated and tortured in absolutely horrendous ways. I mean, anything that trafficker can think of to make that victim comply and obey the trafficker, that's what he or she will do.
By the time the last 2 months I was there, I was getting beaten every 3 hours or so. He waterboarded me, he pistol whipped me, he played Russian roulette with me, he electrocuted me, he burned me with clothing irons, he beat me with metal poles. He actually lacerated like 2 of my organs that way. So he was very violent, and the fear of dying kept growing as the beatings got worse and worse, to the point where I just thought that was the way I was gonna die.
Right now, I just want to bring to the stage from Truckers Against Trafficking. I'll make sure I said that without messing it up. Candace Harris, folks. Let's give her a big welcome.
I'm just gonna put this stationary. Well, good morning. It is a privilege to be here with you this morning. Thanks, Greg. to talk to you, yes, indeed, about the realities of human trafficking, specifically a focus on domestic sex trafficking, and really how you, as a school bus driver, can play an integral role in recognizing and reporting this heinous crime. As Greg said, I'm Candace Harris. I'm the Executive Director of Truckers Against Trafficking. And Truckers Against Trafficking, or TAT for short, as we like to call it, has been working with the trucking industry since 2009 on this issue. And truckers are proving time and time again that they are the eyes and ears of our nation's highways, as their efforts have led to many victims of human trafficking being identified and recovered by law enforcement. But now at TAT, we have decided we need to be approaching the bus industry as well. Because think about it, professional bus drivers, whether passenger or school, dispatch workers, terminal employees, maintenance operators, those folks also, you folks, are also on the front lines.
He would take us here every morning after we got off of work. He would usually have Karaya run in there, look around, and then if she saw a girl that she thought was a good target, I guess for lack of better terms, then he would park the car and come in and talk to her. And sometimes he talked to her for hours. And sometimes they would get in the car and come home with us. And he was just looking for vulnerable girls that were down on their luck and really were lost, just like I was. And so he would come here to find them. He said it was a perfect place.
When we think about how many passengers actually take buses, I mean, it's hundreds of millions of passenger trips annually here in the United States. Think about all of those points of intersection the bus industry actually has with potential victims. You may find yourself in a position where you are able to actually have a conversation with a potential victim, and they open up to you a little bit, and you starting to hear some things that don't add up.
I had a boy that was learning disabled, and he basically missed a transfer bus, and he wound up in my office. And a woman kept calling, identifying herself as his aunt. The aunt had explained that this young man's mother was a crack addict and unable to take care of him, and that she had arranged for his transportation using a bus service from Georgia up to New York. I called up the local sheriff's department down in Georgia to make contact with anyone who knew who the legal guardian was of this boy. I wound up speaking to a port employee who happened to know the family, knew the mother very well, gave me the telephone number. I spoke to the mother directly, and she was clear as a bell, obviously not an addict. Her son had been missing for 2 days, and she explained that her son was learning disabled and had been approached by this person online who was trying to get him to come up to New York. It turns out that this woman was not an aunt, that she was working for a pimp who was running a, we'll call it a brothel, that again specialized in underage boys and underage men. A bus employee thought that they were doing the right thing, that they were helping a kid out. The problem is the bad guys will always take advantage of our sympathies. They're always going to tell us a story to get what they want. They will lie, they will cheat, sometimes they will kill to get what they want, and what they want are these kids.
Trafficking happens on all forms of transportation. Airplanes, cross-country buses to local buses. I've seen it in both forms on a Greyhound that was coming from Los Angeles to Sacramento, and I've seen it on the local buses. And usually the perpetrator is watching from the distance, not really interacting with the victim when they're on the buses together. But sometimes they'll send the girls by themselves, and they're expected to make a certain amount of money before they can come home, wherever that might be.
You know, this crime really is hidden in plain sight. She may not be handcuffed, most likely won't be. But if her story doesn't add up, or if he is under the control of somebody else, and something in your gut is telling you it's not right, something is not right, you can make a call on behalf of that child. You can make a call on behalf of that adult.
Not long ago, a New York law enforcement officer was called to the scene by a bus driver who said that he saw two young girls that he thought, you know what, they're in a restricted area of a bus terminal, something is not quite right. Both of these girls have also offered at least one driver sex in exchange for a free ride to Pennsylvania. The officer takes them back to his office. He gets the grandmother on the phone. The grandmother starts begging for mercy for her two granddaughters. One who was 19 years old and had a severe learning disability, and the other who was 18 years old and just turned 18 a month ago. They had been living in a house and really a front for an underage brothel in Pennsylvania. The older girl was in a, what she thought, honest to goodness romantic relationship with the pimp. And his mother was the one that ran the brothel. Until they brought up a 15-year-old girl from South America. And guess what? The pimp starts sleeping with the 15-year-old girl. So this 19-year-old is so shocked and she begins to complain. So the mother of the pimp throws both of the girls out of their house so they can learn their place. And in the process, she steals their stuff. And the mother says, well, you can get your stuff back for $400. And here are the sexual services that you can provide in order to earn that $400. So the New York law enforcement officer takes those two girls, he puts them on a bus back home to their grandma. They arrest the mother and the son. They recover the underage victims as well as some of the adult victims who were being forced to work in that brothel, all because a bus driver decided not to just keep on walking, but he took a second look and made a huge difference.
It's not as if we have stringent security for who's coming on a bus or who's coming on a train. Sometimes if they have an adult put them on a bus, that's enough. Nobody really asks any question. But nobody's really asking, who's the adult that's putting this kid on a bus? Or sometimes, who is this adult that's picking this kid up off the bus? Or is there an adult that's picking this kid up off the bus? Now, some bus companies have stricter regulations, but a lot don't. A lot don't.
You know what's normal. You know what normal behavior looks like on your bus. What if two people come up and one is not allowed to speak freely? The other one does all the talking, most likely older than the individual not allowed to speak. The individual not allowed to speak doesn't have an ID on them because most likely the trafficker is holding it for them. There's a fearful demeanor, most likely. This person is just uncomfortable being with this other individual. Do you actually see any outward signs of bruising? Traffickers won't necessarily always be sitting by their victims. It could be behind them, it could be to the side, somewhere else in the bus, and yet they're obsessively watching them. They're controlling that person through bodily cues. What if you work in a terminal and you notice day in and day out, or even weekly, right, that there's a car that comes and the person that comes and is kind of strolls the terminal never really gets on to ride a bus? But instead, that individual is always approaching young girls, girls that look a little out of place, girls that look potentially vulnerable. And this individual is always coming up and talking to the girls. And even at times, he's gotten the girls to come with him. And so paying attention for those signs of pimp control is absolutely key if you're a terminal employee.
It's always struck me as odd, as a bus might take 3 days to get from some state out west to come into New York City. And so a kid has been riding a bus for 3 days, sometimes in the middle of the school week by themselves, the same bus driver. Or maybe there was a switch off and there were two bus drivers handling this. And nobody thought to ask a question, why is this kid traveling by themselves in the middle of a school week? Why is this kid carrying everything they own in a backpack or a plastic garbage bag? And they're traveling from some small town out west all the way to New York City. This should strike a chord with people. This is a very obvious sign that something's potentially wrong.
If you're in a position to actually have a conversation, whether it's cross-country or inner-city bus, ask them, do they know who's picking them up? Are they familiar with the person who put them on the bus?
Jeffco is made up of 86,500 students, and we transport pretty much a third of those students, so it can fluctuate one year to the other. Last year we were right around 32,000 students that we transport every day. With a topic like this is about student safety. This is about, students, who you pick up and you drop off at wherever their location is every day, their safety. And it goes beyond the bus now. It goes to the point of they're walking away and you're watching which cars they're going to and making that difference. So for me, it's taking that extra second. Do we have to add more time to our routes? So be it, if it's going to save a student from being in a situation that's unfavorable for them.
Keep your eyes open. If this is just in the back of your mind saying, where is this kid going and is this kid safe? Just take it upon yourself to be a hero in your head for 1 second. Just to look out for this kid for 1 second.
Half of America's school children ride the bus daily. I mean, you as a school bus driver interact with these kids on a continual basis. What if a child begins to have frequent absences? And before they were always on the school bus and go into school. What about if that child appears malnourished or unkempt and disheveled? And before, this kid came, clean clothes, hair was brushed, those kinds of things. Or you start to notice major changes in their behavior. Uncontrollable anger, or maybe it's uncontrollable crying. There's all sorts of emotional highs and lows, and you're knowing something's just not right with this kid. Or maybe the kid is showing up with all of the latest gadgets, right? Or their nails done, or the hair done. I mean, sometimes the pimps will groom their victims, and in doing so, they shower them with affection and attention and purchased items in order to earn that person's trust and affection.
I wanted this presentation to really touch my folks to say, hey, I need to take that extra second now to pay attention to my kiddos on this bus versus, all right, so my kid on the bus, hey, on and off. Yeah, come on, let's take that extra step to look.
School is often one of the last places that these victims are seen before they disappear entirely. They may have already run away from home, but they're still showing up to school. You do not want to talk to this kid and say, are you a victim of human trafficking? They will look at you sideways. They have probably never even heard of the term. But if you say something like, is anybody making you do something you're uncomfortable with? Are you being threatened in any way? Is your family being threatened? And when you're talking to that kid, get to know them a little bit. I know the bus ride is not that long, but maybe they can sit behind you. Maybe you can engage them in conversation. Maybe they just know there's a friendly face out there, an adult in their life who actually cares. Ask them, sure you're all right? Anybody making you do anything you're uncomfortable with? I just want you to know I'm here for you. That makes such a difference when they're actually treated as a human being.
If I was a bus stop employee, I would call the police and I would maybe try and stop her and say something like, I just want to make sure everything's all right, or something like that. Something along those lines to make sure that girl knows that she is being watched over. Some girls, just like me, I didn't feel like I was cared for by anyone. So hearing that from anyone would have been enough for me.
What we found with Truckers Against Trafficking is that it's amazing what an impact that a small group of dedicated individuals can have when they actually understand the issue that they're looking at. They understand the crime of human trafficking, and then they care enough to get involved. And so now we have hundreds of thousands of truck drivers and truck stop employees, right, who get this crime and who are actively looking for it. And so instead of being passive as they were before because they didn't understand the crime, they are now becoming a disruptive force along our nation's highways. They are recognizing the crime of human trafficking, and they are immediately placing calls to local law enforcement and to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And as a result, lives are being saved.
We depend on the public to alert us to this, that the public has to come up to us, the public has to take an interest in other people's kids, other kids in danger. We constantly depend on drivers and dispatchers, traffic agents, control agents, to alert us to this. And they're being educated, as far as I know, on a national level about what human trafficking is and the sort of mass exploitation that's going on. The sort of thing that we would turn a blind eye to, we can't afford to anymore.
If you're seeing a crime in progress, call 911. But then we're asking you after that 911 call, or if you're not sure if you're really seeing human trafficking, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You will be talking to staff 24/7 that are trained on the crime of human trafficking and can help answer any questions you might have so that you are able to ascertain if indeed you are looking at a human trafficking situation.
There's a particular employee that works for a very large bus company who routinely calls me about teenage girls that appear to be in distress. "Hey, can you come here? I got something. I'm really worried about this girl." I can't tell the amount of times that I've dealt with her personally regarding missing kids, and also kids that are being trafficked, that kids that are either on their way towards being indoctrinated in the life, or they're trying to get away from the life, or they're in transport for a particular event. I just became someone that she could call on whenever she saw something. And the more she got involved in this, the more she made that phone call, the more attuned she became towards what to look for.
So when you partner with Busing on the Lookout, basically we are asking you to train your employees. Every single bus driver and terminal employee, watch this training DVD and then go over the signs to look for that are accompanying on this bus wallet card, this Busing on the Lookout bottle wallet card. You know, when you open the card up, it has the red flag indicators, it's got the questions to ask, and you also have the actionable information law enforcement needs to open an investigation. And the great part about this wallet card is it means you always have the national hotline number handy and you can make the call.
You know, for me, what we're going to do at this point is, you know, the brochure and information that you have, we're going to put these on each one of our buses. So now we have that number readily available for our drivers. So instead of them trying to find it, it's right here on their dashboard that they can reach out and start doing that thing and say, hey, okay, this looks kind of weird. So I'm going to hit that number and kind of go forward and do so.
It is okay to be wrong. You can remain, when you call the hotline, you remain anonymous and confidential. No harm done. But what if you're right? What if you're right? Isn't it worth a phone call to find out?
I had 12 surgeries. I had 28 broken bones. One in my skull, 3 in my back, 3 in the vertebrae in my neck, 4 in my jaw, 18 in my ribs, lacerations to my liver, my kidney, and my spleen. I was internally bleeding from my spleen. I had 1/3 of my blood because of all the beatings and blood that I lost. I had gangrene infection on my butt, and I had gangrene infection on my hand. And so there was a month of hospitalization. I was able to get the social workers and my family to work together to get me out of the Las Vegas hospital, and I was medically evac'd to California. And that was really my way out. That fact that I was able to get out of Las Vegas area. He was calling the hospital and seeing if I was still there and stuff like that. So I was really scared being there.
You know, most people, when they hear about this issue, and I get it, it's dark, it's tough. Most people want to help, but not everybody is in a critical position to make an impact. But you guys are.
Bad guys are always out there. They're always working, they're always looking. It's only right that good people do the same. You know, keep their eyes out for people to help, for people to save, for people to protect, to do one small thing, and that's make a call.
So I got out of the hospital in the beginning of August. I gave my statement in the middle of August, and then middle of September he was picked up. And we didn't have trial until March of 2016.
The 20-year-old victim stood bravely before Judge Richard Scotti, describing horrific abuse by 30-year-old Robert Sharp III, who stood expressionless on the other side of the room.
I will never completely recover from the emotional damage.
She recounted how Sharp would beat her, turning up the stereo and laughing out loud to drown out her screams. While Robert Sharp's victim may never escape her memories of 8 weeks in the hands of a sadistic pimp, at least the life sentence means he'll never have the chance to hurt her again.
To call up a family and say, you know, your daughter that's been missing, she's in my office right now, she's alive, and she wants to come home. And that's an amazing feeling. It's an amazing gift. You provided a miracle for a family. But unless people get involved, that miracle doesn't happen.
I think it's beyond important to just be compassionate and caring and notice those little things that are going wrong and notice those little cues that most people don't notice. I needed somebody to really care. I needed somebody who had compassion and made me feel cared for, because I didn't have that, and most victims don't.
Each of us can be on the lookout. Each of us can be paying attention to these red flags and hopefully make a call that leads to saving a life.